Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the tiled shadows of an ancient dynasty, not with clashing swords or political drama, but with the soft gurgle of water trickling through clay pipes underfoot. You wake inside a wooden Hanak house, its paper walls still trembling slightly from the wind. The floor beneath you is warm from last night's charcoal heat, and somewhere behind the lattice doors, a stream babbles like it has secrets. It's Korea, the Joseon Dynasty, 15th century give or take. And while the rest of the world is still perfecting the art of dumping waste out the nearest window, you're about to discover a civilization that's already figured out how to make plumbing quiet, efficient, elegant even. You shuffle to the open veranda. The air smells like pine-steamed rice and something vaguely herbal, maybe the neighbor's footbath. There's a faint tapping sound as water drips steadily from a curved roof tile into a stone basin below. It's not just decorative. That drip is part of a larger system, one that's been working mostly uncredited for hundreds of years. This isn't the Rome of aqueducts or the bathhouses of Byzantium. Joseon water systems didn't shout. They whispered. And you, sleepy wanderer, are just in time to listen. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this sleepy little corner of history reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step carefully over the threshold and notice something odd. There's no chamber pot in the corner, no night soil bucket, no foul smell clinging to the floor, and certainly no frantic servant scurrying around with a mop and shame. Instead, the air is clean. The floor is heated. And beneath the house, a stream of gray water from yesterday's washing quietly joins a channel that will carry it far away before sunrise. This is Ondal, the heartwarming floor system that doesn't just heat your toes, but serves double duty as a primitive plumbing marvel. Charcoal smoke from the kitchen. Fire courses under the floor before escaping through a chimney at the far end. That warm tunnel. It also dries and directs water runoff, naturally disinfecting it with heat and keeping the household dry. You're basically walking on a furnace-powered filtration system. Neat, right? Historians still argue whether Ondal systems count as plumbing by modern definitions, but you're not here to nitpick. You're here to marvel as warm air tickles your ankles and clay pipes snake away into the countryside like roots from some great mechanical tree. The early Joseon architects didn't rely on pumps or valves. They didn't need to. They had gravity. They had slope, and they had janggukdae, those charming stone platforms where fermented treasures, soy sauce gochujang, bubbled in massive clay jars, all connected to the same water harvesting logic. Step outside and you'll see. It channels carved into courtyards, slanted flagstones, directing runoff into tiny, covered drains. The whole neighborhood breathes in patterns of water, and you, dear time traveler, are floating through it like a leaf in a stream. There's something hypnotic about this rhythm. Drip, trick, gurgle. Even the animals know the pattern. A cat slinks past you, stepping carefully around the open spout of a kitchen drain, where rice water flows out already on its way to nourish someone's backyard radishes. Nothing wasted. Everything flowing. In the quiet, you hear an old woman pour tea into a stone bowl, and the leftover rinse water is tipped into a channel that leads well. Where does it lead? That's part of the magic. You can follow it later if your feet aren't too cold. For now, just know it's not random. That water knows exactly where it's going. Some archaeologists insist these were simple systems, just runoff drains, nothing more. Others claim they rivaled anything in contemporary Europe. But here's the twist: Joseon plumbing wasn't designed to impress engineers. It was designed to make life gentle, quiet, seamless, and quiet it is. Even now at dawn, when vendors are still covering their baskets and monks are tying up their robes, the water whispers on. A little. Down the road, a man yawns and throws out his basin water, and it's already sliding down a sloped groove into the same stream you saw earlier. You could almost set your watch to the movement if you had one. But who needs a watch when the morning flow tells you what time it is? You pass a corner shop where rice flour is being mixed in a stone bowl. The rinse water. You guessed it poured directly into the drain, which curves out of sight beneath the eaves of the building. Follow it far enough, and you'll find it meets runoff from 5 other houses, all gathered in a gentle convergence before slipping under a covered footpath. One of the footstones is a little warm. You step on it again. Yes, definitely warm. That's no accident. Some of these covered walkways double as exhaust paths for Gudul, the heated floor smoke tunnels. Others simply carry water beneath them, cleverly insulated, so nothing freezes overnight. You wonder how many tourists ever notice. Not many, probably. They're too busy looking for the big stuff, palaces, paintings, fireworks. But tonight you're tuned in to the quiet stuff. The elegant, the intentional. The genius that hums beneath your feet and sings lullabies with every drop. A crow lands nearby. It looks at you sideways as if to say, "Took you long enough to notice." You step out of the quiet hanok and into the wide outer courtyard of a royal palace complex. The early morning air smells faintly of ginkgo and damp stone. A low mist hugs the ground, and the silence is almost theatrical, like the entire palace is holding its breath, waiting for the rituals to begin. But your ears are tuned to something else. The trickle, the hush, the barely audible sigh of water moving beneath the grandeur. You pass between curved roofs and lacquered red pillars. Servants move like ghosts, their feet wrapped in cloth, their voices muted. One carries a covered porcelain jar. Another carries a bundle of firewood. But there's no panic. No smell. No unsightly buckets. The palace may house hundreds of people yet. It feels clean, even in the heart of morning routine. And then you find it tucked behind a smaller gate shaded by a tree that might have once heard the words of a king, the royal toilet. Yes, it exists, but not how you might think. There's no golden throne or velvet curtain. Instead, you discover a modest structure with polished stone floors and a ventilation opening facing the garden. It's elegant, unassuming, and cleverly, ingeniously functional. This is where the king does his business literally and politically. And the most remarkable part? There's no smell. None. Because beneath this modest seat lies a sloped clay conduit angled just so, using gravity to send waste downward into a long, curved channel. That channel is lined with fired clay bricks and flushed regularly with gray water from nearby kitchens or laundries. It flows gently, never loud, never chaotic, just enough to carry waste into a larger collection system outside the palace perimeter. Historians still argue whether this qualifies as a full sanitation system or just a glorified latrine. But you don't care. You're too busy marveling at the simplicity. No knobs, no pumps, no noisy splashing. Just a perfectly angled chute that understands the basics of fluid dynamics better than half your high school classmates ever did. You peek beneath the seat. Not too far, let's keep this PG, but enough to see a clever wooden frame built for airflow with a ceramic ring sealed to prevent seepage. Nearby, a basin of ash sits quietly, used occasionally to dry waste and minimize smell. You begin to realize that this isn't primitive. It's thoughtful. It's efficient. It's the opposite of the chamber pot and toss it out the window chaos you might find in Renaissance Europe. In fact, while European nobility were still mistaking perfume for hygiene, the Joseon court had integrated basic principles of sanitation into daily life without fanfare, without plumbing manuals, without even bragging about it. A palace gardener passes you nodding. He's carrying a bucket of wash water, not waste, just gray water. He pours it into a channel lined with river stones that runs alongside the flower beds. The same channel, you realize, that diverts part of the palace waste system through a natural filter of sand, charcoal, and crushed seashells, before releasing it far, far away into the hills. Did they think about ecology in those terms? Probably not. But they understood balance. Harmony. If your waste system messes with your garden, you fix your waste system, not the garden. You pass a window and catch a glimpse of court ladies laughing over breakfast. Their quarters, too, are connected to discreet drains and sloped flooring. Water from washing faces or rinsing hair flows away silently, carried off by subtle inclines built into the flooring. And just like that, your concept of toilet starts to shift. See, in the West, a toilet is a thing, a seat, a flushing mechanism. But here in Joseon, it's a flow, a design, a part of the building itself integrated into the structure just like light or warmth. It's not a destination. It's a direction, and you, dreamer, are walking through it. Later, you pause at a quiet corridor between two pavilions and see an older eunuch explaining the flushing system to a nervous young apprentice. The older man points to the slope of the tile, to the gutter that runs under the eaves, to a small opening that lets rainwater flush through a nearby privy. His tone is patient, reverent even. "See the angle," he says softly in words you barely catch. "Too steep and it splashes, too shallow and it sits. Here." He squats to demonstrate. "Here it flows." You watch in awe. You're learning more about hydrodynamics in this 5-minute eavesdrop than in an entire semester of physics. But it's not just technical, it's cultural. Because in Joseon, society waste wasn't shameful. It was just part of the cycle. Human waste, when properly treated, was often reused as fertilizer. Yes, night soil, but not dumped, managed. There were collectors, fermenters, even a tax system in some villages for sharing it. Gross, sure, but also brilliant. And while the West recoiled from its own smells and built towering water closets with elaborate pulleys and brass, the Koreans stuck with low, grounded, slope-based systems that required little maintenance and even less noise. You circle back toward the main hall. The mist is lifting now, revealing stone pathways and sculpted hedges. A tiny bird splashes in a carved stone basin near a kitchen drain. The drain itself curves around a hibiscus bush and disappears beneath a wooden walkway. And you realize you've been walking over waste channels this whole time and never noticed. Because here's the thing Joseon Plumbing didn't call attention to itself. It just worked. And it still does in some restored Hanok homes and traditional inns. Quiet, sloping, whispering systems that carry away the unmentionable parts of life without drama. You pause beside a flowering tree. Somewhere behind you, a royal breakfast is being prepared, and the kitchen wastewater is already trickling its way toward the hidden channels that lace the gardens. You smile. It's not glamorous, but it's genius. Quiet genius. You leave the palace grounds through a side gate, where the stone pathway dips ever so slightly, just enough for rain to find its rhythm downhill. The air smells clean, like it rained hours ago, but the sun hasn't committed to rising yet. You pause at the threshold, one foot on royal ground, the other on the stone streets of early Seoul. And then you notice a small pipe half hidden under the gate's ledge, with a gentle curve and a telltale shimmer of moisture around the mouth. That's no accident. That's the gravity-fed runoff system doing its job. Again, now that you know what to look for, you start seeing them everywhere, angled tiles that tip rainwater away from walls, flat ceramic pipes that lead under walkways, even humble-looking gutters cut into alley edges. This isn't just flood prevention, it's choreography. Because Joseon Plumbing worked with gravity, not against it. There were no water towers, no massive pumps, no over-engineered fountains sputtering under pressure. Instead, every drain, every flow, every wash basin was positioned with one simple truth in mind: water always wants to go down. So they let it. You wander into a modest noble's house, not palace-sized, but still big enough to house 3 generations and an opinionated aunt with a fan collection. The courtyard is lovely, framed by persimmon trees and sun-warmed flagstones. You step across the center and realize again, the ground isn't level. It tilts ever so slightly toward a corner, where a covered channel vanishes into the wall. You trace the flow backward with your eyes past the kitchen door under the laundry ledge behind the bathhouse, and realize all wastewater in the house is heading in the same direction. Quietly, elegantly, inside, a servant is drawing hot water into a basin. Not from a faucet, those haven't shown up yet, but from a sunken stone cistern, heated over charcoal and carried with care. The floor beneath her is gently sloped with a central groove lined in clay. Any spill will find its way to the drain. This clay work is worth pausing for. Joseon artisans shaped it by hand-baking pipes in outdoor kilns measuring the slope by eye and spirit level. Well, not spirit level, but close enough. And these weren't clunky tubes either. They were designed to fit seamlessly beneath floors or inside walls, coated to prevent seepage, and joined at precise angles with wrapped hemp seals. Historians still argue whether these angled pipes were ever standardized, or if each home was its own unique plumbing poem. Some insist there were regional differences: Jeolla pipes, slightly wider, Gyeonggi ones, more curved. But there's no question about function. These systems worked. And sometimes they worked better than what you've got in your apartment today. You know the one. where you have to run the tap for a full 90 seconds before it gets warm. Yeah, that one. In Joseon homes, water traveled from rooftop catchments or nearby streams through channels designed to respect gravity temperature and use. A kitchen pipe might slope downward into the yard while a bathhouse drain might bend sideways before joining the main runoff. No water wasted, no standing puddles, and crucially, no freezing in winter because pipes weren't exposed to air. They ran underground or under gudul heated floors, warming gently with each use. And that brings you to the gudul again. If ondol was the brain of the home, then gudul was the warm-bellied heart. Smoke from the kitchen stove would be guided through hollow channels beneath the stone floors, warming rooms from below. But guess what else it warmed? The very channels through which grey water drained. That's right, an ancient anti-freeze system powered by your rice cooker. You press your palm to a stone slab near the edge of the floor. It's warm, slightly damp. You realize water just passed through here, maybe from washing rice, or cleaning feet, or rinsing a baby's bottom. And now, it's gone whisked away through the warm stone veins of the house. There's something deeply satisfying about this system. It's not flashy. It doesn't rely on pressure gauges or squealing valves. It just works with earth, with slope, with gravity, and with heat. A quiet collaboration between stone fire and human need. You pass into a smaller side room where elderly members of the family rest. One is napping her silver hair spread across a bamboo pillow. A small ceramic urinal decorated naturally is placed beside her. At night, waste would be collected here and poured into a discrete clay funnel connected to a separate outflow, which leads to a waste-only drain near the back of the yard. No cross-contamination. No sloshing bucket journeys through the house. A young boy plays with a carved turtle figurine near a tiny stream that curls through the back garden. That stream is fed by rainwater, collected off of the roof, passed through a simple sand filter and routed gently through decorative stones before seeping into the soil or being redirected for flushing. Yes, you've just stumbled into the precursor to the modern gray water system, complete with ornamental landscaping. You linger by the garden path watching the water slip away beneath your feet. And then you hear it again, that whispering chuckle of a pipe, emptying somewhere just below the surface. It's almost like the house is breathing, like it's exhaling the used water of its day, already preparing for the next. Later, as dusk returns, you sit beneath the awning of the guest quarters sipping barley tea. A distant neighbor dumps dishwater into a courtyard channel, and you trace the sound as it glides through stone grooves to the central runoff. That central groove, by the way, leads down a gentle hill where several households contribute their flows into a shared community channel lined with stone and covered in bamboo mats to keep leaves and critters out. And now you understand every piece fits. Every home is a node. Every drop has a path. The entire system functions like a river delta in miniature. Joseon plumbing wasn't centralized in the way you'd imagine Roman aqueducts or Parisian sewers. It was distributed, intuitive, local, and it trusted people to pay attention. To tilt the pipe, to maintain the channel, to pour wisely and let nature do the rest. And you're starting to feel it. That rhythm, that hush, that brilliance hidden beneath layers of stone and time. Night falls gently over the village and you're invited into the home of a Yangban scholar. The kind of Confucian gentleman who recites poetry, ponders the 5 relationships, and somehow still finds time to supervise his plum trees. You slip off your shoes at the threshold, your feet greeted by the warm hum of the ondol floor beneath. It's toasty but not stifling, like a gentle hand beneath your soles. You're guided into the scholar's sarangbang, his private study. Paper scrolls line the walls. The air smells of ink cedar and a hint of roasted barley tea. But what catches your attention isn't the calligraphy or the lacquered desk. It's the soft sound of water burbling from somewhere just beyond the paper door. That's the scholar's bathhouse, you're told. And yes, he bathes at night. Like many in Joseon society, he believes in washing before rest, not after waking. A clean body invites clean dreams. You follow the sound into a small stone annex where a deep tub is nestled into the floor. Steam curls upward in sleepy tendrils. A low fire smolders in a recess beside it, heating water through a clever channel system that runs beneath the bath and back into the walls. No open flames, no danger. Just a cozy charcoal oven tucked inside a stone belly. A servant kneels nearby, gently pouring warm water over a wooden scoop. You notice how the water runs off into a groove carved into the floor. Sloped, of course, then disappears beneath the tub's edge. No splashing, No puddles. The drain is perfectly calibrated to remove used water while retaining warmth in the room. And the water itself. It's been used before. Not for anything gross, don't worry, but it might have warmed laundry earlier or rinsed vegetables from supper. In Joseon homes, water had a life cycle. First use cooking or bathing. Second use washing tools or floors. Final use flushing. Nothing wasted. Historians still argue whether this sort of gray water reuse was a formalized practice or just a cultural habit. But in homes like this, it's clearly intentional and respectful. Why pour perfectly usable warmth into the dirt when you can give it a second act? The scholar enters, wrapped in robes that swish like parchment. He doesn't say much, just nods and eases himself into the tub with a sigh that could flatten a goose. You feel a strange kinship with him. After all, you're both visitors in this slow-moving world of heat slope and logic. He closes his eyes. The room settles into silence, only the occasional drop of water plink. Plink into the drain gives away the passage of time. While he soaks, you explore the rest of the bathing area. There's a low bench, a ceramic basin, and a stack of worn linen cloths. A jug of cold water stands to the side ready to temper the tub's heat if needed. Every item has its place. Every corner slopes ever so slightly toward the same channel, one slim drain that slips through the stone like a shy thread. And here's the wild part, it doesn't clog. Why? Because the channel's curved, not sharp. It allows debris to pass without getting stuck. Because it's made of polished stone and clay naturally resistant to buildup. And because, frankly, people aren't dumping bacon grease down it. Sorry, modern plumbing. Outside, the used bathwater flows toward a larger clay pipe shared by neighboring houses. It might travel 50 feet before joining a trickle from another home, then another. And always downward, always out. Eventually, it reaches a garden trench near the edge of the property, lined with sand pebbles and sometimes charcoal to help clean and slow the flow. This isn't high-tech, it's smart tech. Ancient smart tech powered by gravity and common sense. You return to the scholar's quarters just as he's stepping out. He dries himself with a soft cloth, then walks barefoot across the warm floor, pausing by a corner drain to tip the leftover water from his basin. No big splash, just a patient trickle swallowed by the system. Now that you know what to look for, you see it everywhere, in the tilt of the hallway, in the curve of the courtyard, stone, in the quiet hum of runoff behind every door. The house is alive with movement, but it whispers instead of shouts. The scholar settles into a low writing desk, dipping his brush in ink. He doesn't write about plumbing. He writes about stars, about the falling of leaves. But you can't help wondering if somewhere in that brushstroke, there's a nod to the cleverness beneath his feet. Outside, a light rain begins to fall. You watch as droplets gather on the curved ceramic roof tiles, then slide into narrow chutes that guide them toward rooftop spouts. From there, they drop with a muffled splash into a courtyard cistern, an open stone bowl lined with moss and memory. That water will be used tomorrow. Heated again, poured again, flowed again. A cat appears, perches on the cistern's edge and flicks its tail. Even it seems to understand the brisafar, the rhythm. Back in the bathhouse, a young servant clears the room. She wipes the stones with a damp cloth, tips the last of the basin water into the floor groove, and adjusts the charcoal firebox for the next day's heat. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. You follow her out, feet warmed by the floor, head lulled by the endless looping grace of sloped stone and flowing water. And somewhere deep in your own memory, you start to wish your bathroom floor could be this thoughtful, or at least this warm. The next morning, you wander into the pulsing heart of Joseon Seoul. Not the palaces, not the scholars' courtyards, but the bustling maze of market alleys where gossip is currency and radish kimchi can start a debate. The air smells alive. Stewed soy charcoal, smoke, fresh herbs, and underneath it all, a quiet, steady trickle. Yes, even here. Vendors set up bamboo mats and flip open the lids of earthenware jars. Pickled vegetables, dried fish, and glutinous rice cakes all make their debut in perfect little piles. But you're focused on the ground, specifically the network of shallow gutters running along the footpaths like veins under a busy skin. These aren't decorative, they're functional. You spot a fishmonger rinsing his knife in a wooden bowl, then tilting the water into a gently curving stone groove that leads downhill. It joins another trickle from a nearby tofu stall, and that stream meets a larger gutter beside the dumpling seller's cart. All choreographed, all flowing. And here's the clever part. Those gutters are slightly covered with flat stones spaced at intervals, wide enough to keep things flowing, narrow enough to step across. Kids hop over them. Cats drink from the edges. You step carefully, noting how each vendor angles their stall, so wastewater drains away from their goods and their neighbors too. A matter of both hygiene and respect. Historians still argue whether these market drain systems were regulated or self-organized. There are records of sanitation laws, yes, even back then, but it's unclear how strictly they were enforced. Some believe market stalls were placed deliberately near communal drains, while others think it was just common sense passed from elder to apprentice, like the secret to pickling garlic without it turning blue. You reach a corner where a tea seller ladles hot water into ceramic cups. After serving a customer, she rinses the ladle and tips the water into a wooden trough behind her cart. You follow its course. It snakes between baskets of dried lotus root, then dips under a flat stepping stone, before reappearing as a surface stream next to a vendor selling bamboo fans. The stream is warm. Why? Because further uphill, someone has emptied a pot of soup rinse water into it. The water's not dirty, just flavored with the scent of scallion and anchovy, and it flows gently downhill, joining a growing trickle that eventually winds its way to a garden plot outside the alley's end. You realize you're witnessing urban composting in motion. Wastewater here feeds soil there. And nobody raises an eyebrow. In one tucked-away alley, a boy scrubs pots beside a noodle stand. He uses ash from last night's fire as a mild abrasive, then pours the water into a bucket. Later, that water cooled and settled will be used to rinse the alley. Not wasted, just rerouted. Meanwhile, old women sit on low stools nearby gossiping in soft tones. You catch fragments: who's getting married, whose son is late for exams, whose fermented radish tasted just a little off last week. The water beneath their feet carries all this life. Used tea, dishwater, vegetable scraps, and none of it smells bad. Why? Because the gutters slope constantly, always moving, never stagnant. A chicken flaps by, pursued by a woman with a basket. She yells something that might be a curse or might be a prayer. Either way, the chicken veers left and skips over a gutter stone, like a seasoned local. You smile. Even the poultry understands the plumbing. At a nearby corner, you spot something remarkable. A public scoop well covered with a tiled awning and surrounded by clean raised flagstones. A woman draws water with a gourd ladle, then splashes a little onto the surrounding stones, not to waste it, but to keep dust down. The runoff trickles into a shallow groove that merges once again into the main flow of the alley. Everywhere you look, water moves, not wildly, not destructively, but constantly. You begin to understand that the genius of Joseon market plumbing isn't in some grand engineering marvel. It's in the consistency, the rhythm, the way every action, boiling, rinsing, cleaning, cooking, automatically contributes to a larger system without stopping to ask for permission. 1,000 tiny decisions sloping ever downward toward balance. Later, as midday heat climbs, a street sweeper comes through, not with a vacuum or hose, but with a bundle of straw tied to a stick. He flicks leaves and stray scraps into the gutter, then tosses a ladle of clean water to help move them along. No high-pressure systems, just gravity, slope, and patience. And then, unexpectedly, you hear music. A young man plucks at a gayagum, the zither strings twanging softly as steam rises from a rice stand nearby. You realize the water he used to soak the rice earlier is now cooling behind him in a ceramic basin, waiting to be reused to rinse bowls before they're served. It's poetic, efficient, intimate, and all the while beneath your feet, water whispers, not shouting with pressure or roaring down steel pipes, but murmuring in channels shaped by hand and habit. It carries stories, flavors dust, and dreams from one end of the alley to the next. You pause beneath a paper lantern and look back at the winding alleys, the patient vendors, the hopping chickens, and the quiet, consistent current that weaves them together. A city alive with water and wise enough to listen. You climb a ladder onto the gently sloped tiled roof of a hanok, invited by a young artisan who insists you won't understand Joseon plumbing until you've felt it from the top. He isn't wrong. From up here, the view stretches over a patchwork of curving eaves, brushwood fences, and leafy courtyards. The rising sun glints off ceramic tiles, each slightly curved like an open hand catching the morning light. And that, as it turns out, is exactly what they were built to do. Rain. You crouch low as he points to the line where two rows of tiles meet. Watch, he says, tipping a small jug of water from the ridge. You expect it to cascade like a clumsy waterfall, but instead it splits evenly along twin channels guided by the shallow gutters formed between tile rows. The water flows downward in two perfect ribbons, gathers at the edge, and drips gently into a stone basin set just beneath the overhang. No splash, no chaos. Just gravity again, but dressed up in glazed clay and poetic precision. This is Joseon rain harvesting, and it's hiding in plain sight. Rooftop tiles weren't just for show. They were infrastructure angled and arranged to shepherd water down across and into wherever the household needed it next. Basins for washing, cisterns for storage, garden channels, even indoor reservoirs in wealthier homes. You follow the artisan along a roof beam toward a covered opening, what appears to be a skylight, but is actually an access hatch to the cheonjitong, or skyground pipe. It's a vertical clay shaft that connects rooftop runoff to a sealed underground tank. He explains that many homes had these quiet reservoirs beneath their courtyard stones, covered in thick lids and surrounded by gravel for filtration. Historians still argue whether these underground tanks were standardized or custom-built. Some say only government buildings and wealthy homes used them. Others believe versions existed in humble homes too, dug with bare hands and sealed with lye ash and resin. What's clear is that they were a marvel of passive water management. You peek down the shaft. It's dry now, but traces of moss line the walls. A toad blinks up at you from the shadows, guardian of the household cistern apparently. Back on the roof, you notice something else small. Spouts called dokgodam carved from stone or fired clay protruding from the eaves like dragon snouts. When the rain pours, they channel runoff with dramatic little arcs into collection jars or garden channels. And on dry days, like this, one they simply frame the sky. Beautiful silent waiting. Your rooftop guide chuckles and nudges you toward the edge. Watch this, he says, holding out a leaf. He places it where two tile rows meet and lets go. The leaf rides the channel like a little boat swaying down the slope, before falling with a tiny plop into the basin below. You grin. Not high-tech, not even medium-tech, just clever. Below you spot a child filling a wooden ladle from a low trough, rinsing her hands. The trough's fed by that very basin rain from above, harvested and redirected through a series of stone-lined channels. These channels etched into the courtyard or mounted along walls often led to multiple destinations. A laundry area, a cooking station, even indoor wash basins. The water isn't wasted. It's used then guided to secondary tasks, watering vegetables, rinsing brooms, or finally, flushing the privy. A graceful cascade of utility with each drop performing an encore. You descend the ladder now seeing the whole courtyard differently. Every groove in the stone, every slope in the tile, every pot with a lid slightly ajar, it's all part of a fluid choreography. In one shaded corner, you spot a shallow roofed depression, a rain garden lined with porous stone and medicinal plants like Essesyuk mugwort and baeksho. These soak up overflow, add scent to the yard, and keep the soil firm. The Joseon equivalent of green infrastructure centuries ahead of its time. And that basin beneath the eaves, it's not just a catchment. It's also a cooling pool. During summer heat, families would leave a sealed jug of tea submerged inside it to keep it chilled, early refrigeration by way of good old thermodynamics. The artisan laughs as he tells you. This hands you a jug and lets you try. It's shockingly cold and refreshingly brilliant. Water isn't merely moved here, it's honored. Not with fanfare, but with foresight. Even indoor wash areas make use of this rooftop bounty. You're shown a bathing room where a flat ceramic bowl is set into the floor. It's not connected to a municipal line, obviously, but it is plumbed. The water arrives via rooftop catchment stored briefly in an upper cistern, then released by a wooden lever that tips a small bucket behind the wall. A rudimentary valve system, powered by gravity and a good nudge. You're told that during the monsoon season, homes would switch entirely to rainwater. The first few minutes of each downpour would be discarded. Roof rinse, they called it. But once the flow was clean, it would be harvested with bowls, jars and tank lids flung open across every yard. The sound of those first raindrops hitting clay tiles magic. A lullaby. A call to action. Children would race to position the jars. Elders would nod at the sky. And someone somewhere would always spill just a little laughing. Even now, a breeze rustles the leaves and makes the old tiles creak faintly. You can almost hear it, the memory of rainfall being welcomed, not fought. Guided, not wasted. You sit at the edge of the courtyard, eyes closed, listening to a trickle of water flowing from yesterday's bath toward a young pear tree. It's soft, steady, circular. And somehow you feel cleaner just for being near it. It's early morning again, your favorite time now. The sky's a hushed gray, and your breath fogs in front of you as you wrap your robes a little tighter. A thin crust of frost traces the courtyard stones, but inside the hanok, the floors are warm, very warm. You wiggle your toes against the stone. Toasty, reliable, as if the house had spent the night hugging you from below. It's not magic. It's Gudul again, your trusty friend. But today, you are about to witness one of its quieter superpowers. Because when winter grips the land and rivers stiffen into silver sheets, Joseon pipes still flow. You pad outside toward a small building on the edge of a hillside property. It looks humble, just a shed really. But inside it's something remarkable. A warm water storage chamber lined with stone and nestled against a cooking hearth. This isn't a bath. It's a flow buffer, a kind of heat-insulated tank that keeps water ready to move even when the world tries to freeze it in place. The system is clever. So clever, in fact, that historians still argue whether it was developed intentionally to defeat frost or whether it emerged as a lucky side effect of the Gudul heating network. Either way, it works. You're shown how water from this tank flows through shallow clay-lined conduits that hug the warm zones of the house beneath floors, behind kitchens and alongside fireboxes. The ambient heat from fires used for cooking, heating, and even drying grain is enough to keep the pipes just above freezing, so long as the fires stay active. No insulation rolls, no electric heat tape, just geometry and thermal inertia. A man kneels beside a curved channel that dips under a stone slab. He holds a thin reed to the surface. Nothing's frozen. He smiles. You follow him as he opens a small wooden flap in the ground. Beneath it, a water passage glows faintly with residual heat from yesterday's fire. The runoff from kitchen tasks, bathing, and laundry doesn't stop just because the calendar turned to January. It trickles on, steaming slightly as it winds toward the shared community drain at the base of the hill. Nearby, another homeowner has wrapped a clay pipe in dried rice straw. This old trick adds a touch of insulation, keeping the morning chill from clinging too hard to exposed areas. You touch the straw bundle, dry, warmish, and snug like a sleeping bag for water. But that's not the only strategy. You visit a farmstead where the privy is positioned slightly uphill from the animal shelter. Why? So warm water runoff from the livestock area. Yes, even cows give off useful heat travels beneath the latrine pipe, warming it from below. It's part of a larger principal thermal pairing. If there's a warm task being done, firewood burning rice, steaming cows chewing cud, the runoff is guided to places where warmth is most needed. Not wasted, redirected. Even urinals are considered. You spot a men's latrine with a slanted porcelain surface leading to a clay funnel. That funnel, rather than draining directly into the ground where it might freeze, first passes by a small compost pile, a slow-burning, naturally warm heap of vegetable peels, and ash. Just enough heat to keep the flow fluid. Kids pass by with buckets of gray water from washing rice. You follow them to a slope behind the house where they pour it carefully into a frost-resistant drain lined with loose stone. The space between the stones prevents freezing by letting air move and water spread rather than pool. It's rustic, but incredibly effective. In the cities, the same principle holds. Market alley gutters are often built with sun exposure in mind, south-facing when possible, and shaded by eaves only where summer heat might be a concern. Winter channels, meanwhile, run near chimneys or cookhouses, places where warmth is dependable. And here's where it gets a little uncanny. You visit a monk's retreat tucked into a chilly mountainside. Snow lines the rooftops. Icicles hang from tree branches. But the footpath is wet, not icy. The monk chuckles and lifts a flap of canvas near the garden fence. Beneath it, a continuous stream of water flows narrow, warm, and alive. It's fed from a cistern heated by a fire used for daily tea ceremonies. The water then flows through a channel carved into the footpath, keeping it just warm enough to prevent ice, even in January. Tea keeps the mountain from slipping? He says with a grin. You both laugh. Then he offers you a cup. The cup warms your fingers as you watch a crane take off in the distance. Below, steam rises from where hot water from his morning ablutions meets the cold stone gutter. You can't hear the water, but you can hear its absence. No cracking ice. No chipping sounds. No swearing over frozen buckets. Joseon winter plumbing wasn't just about survival. It was about continuity, keeping the rhythm going. A society built around the concept that water must move, must flow even when your fingers are too numb to feel it. As you sip your tea, you realize there are no emergency measures here. No backups, just designed so good it doesn't need a plan B. The snow crunches underfoot as you return to town. A small boy scrapes ash from a fire and sprinkles it along the gutter where water's slowing down. The ash keeps the water moving. Another old trick. You wonder how many of these methods were invented and how many were simply observed. Your path ends at a city garden where wastewater from multiple homes gently steams its way into a terraced patch of kale and cabbage. Beneath the frost, you see the dark, damp roots of winter greens reaching happily into the soil, warmed just enough by household runoff to keep growing. It's freezing, but the water still flowing. Always. You're invited next into a world you've glimpsed only from the edges, the narrow corridors behind the palace kitchens, the sliding panels at the back of the queen's quarters, the low doors barely tall enough for anyone over 5 feet. Here live the people who keep the water warm, the floors hot, and the systems quietly humming the servants. You enter through a rear passage cloaked in shadows, walls slick with condensation from nearby steam vents. It smells of boiled barley wood smoke and the faint, earthy note of wet stone. The floor is slightly sloped, of course, and warm to the touch. Someone's already stoked the agungi, the kitchen hearth. It's barely dawn, but the household has been alive for hours. This is where you meet the Nine and eunuch staff, court ladies and male attendants tasked with keeping the palace running. They glide through the half-lit corridors in layers of cotton and practice carrying water buckets with the elegance of ballet dancers and the speed of alarm clocks. One young Nain shows you a narrow opening behind a cooking hall. It leads not into another room, but into a system of low, vented channels. Crouching, you peek inside. It's a tight crawl space just enough for a thin body and a big task tending the fire that heats the ondal floors above. You imagine the job of moving through a maze of subterranean tunnels, feeding kindling into brick fireboxes, adjusting airflow with clever little stone dampers. It's not glamorous. It's hot, cramped, and never praised. But it's essential, because if one section of the ondal fails, the entire floor loses its gentle warmth and nobody sleeps well. Not the queen, not her attendants, not the royal cats. What you didn't realize until now is that this firework also powers the palace's hidden plumbing. Pipes run parallel to the heat vents close enough to benefit from the warmth, but far enough to avoid overheating. A delicate balance, and entirely reliant on servants who understand the system by feel, not blueprint. Historians still argue whether palace staff received formal training in these techniques or simply learned through apprenticeship. Written records are rare. Most of the knowledge passed mouth to ear, steam to hand, generation to generation. In one corner of the servants' wing, you find an old woman rinsing linens in a stone basin. She pulls a lever, a simple wooden switch, and water flows from a spout above. But wait, you trace the pipe back through the wall. There's no river-fed pump. Instead, it's gravity again. The water comes from a rooftop cistern filled during the last rainfall and filtered through a bed of gravel and rice straw. Pull the lever, and a flap opens. Water flows. Close it, and a stone plug reseals the shaft. You watch her pour rinse water down a shallow channel in the floor, which curves behind the laundry chamber and disappears into a dark tunnel. You ask well gesture where it goes. She smiles, points down, and says something that loosely translates to, "It goes where it needs to." Behind the walls, there are secret channels, wastewater conduits carved beneath the stone, guarded by nothing more than screens of bamboo bundles of charcoal and carefully measured slope. No waste backs up. No smell leaks out. The system breathes silently and cleanly. Elsewhere, a eunuch checks a steam release valve at the base of a royal bath. You hadn't realized there were valves at all, but here's one made of curved stone plates that can be slid aside or blocked with an ash-stuffed plug. It controls how much heat escapes beneath the floor and whether steam is allowed to vent into the ceiling flue. This vent, you're told, can be redirected sometimes into a bathing room, sometimes into the drying room where herbs are strung upside down to cure. The same steam that softened the queen's skin also dried her medicinal tea leaves. Efficiency born of necessity and a healthy bit of practical genius. You trail the servant down a narrow corridor lined with storage jars and stacked wood. A tiny spout drips into a ceramic catchpot. It's the overflow from a hidden cistern. Every drop used, the man mumbles. "Even when we don't mean to." You believe him. Later, in a chamber beneath the crown prince's quarters, you witness something astonishing. A latticework of interwoven conduits, half for smoke, half for water. The hot smoke runs through the floor's belly, warming everything above it. Meanwhile, the gray water from hand-washing, toothbrushing, and the morning face wipe ritual flows alongside, shielded by a clever layer of clay tile to avoid overheating. The engineer in you marvels. The sleeper in you just wants to curl up on the warm stone and melt. Of course, none of this exists in diagrams. You won't find plumbing blueprints in Joseon royal archives. What exists is embodied knowledge, practice, memory, and beneath it all, the fire. Every channel, every spout, every warm floorboard depends on the daily labor of servants who rise before dawn, keep the hearth stoked, and know which valve needs a pebble to stay closed. One court lady tells you that when a fire goes out midwinter, they don't relight it immediately. First, they check the water channels, because cold water in a suddenly hot pipe can crack even the finest clay. Everything is balance. Heat meets water. Water meets waste. Waste meets earth. And all of it hidden. You return to the surface blinking in the midday light. The palace looks the same, serene, elegant, symmetrical. But now you know there's a second palace beneath this one, a humming, steaming, trickling world of ducts and drains, kept alive not by nobles or scholars, but by quiet hands in the dark. And just like the plumbing, they don't need to be seen to be essential. You step into a quiet hall lined with delicate, porcelain-glazed celadon vases, fine inkwells, rice bowls so thin you can see the light tremble through them. This is not a plumbing area, or so you think, until you see it. In one corner, seated behind a small table, an elderly craftsman places the finishing touches on a broad-bottomed porcelain vessel with a curved lip and a narrow inward-bent spout. You squint. A U or A flower vase. Nope. It's a chamber pot. Yes, a Joseon-era urinal, crafted with the same care as ceremonial teaware. It's gleaming white, impossibly symmetrical, and decorated with cobalt blue cranes in flight. You stare. The cranes seem very optimistic about their assignment. The craftsman chuckles and invites you to look closer. The pot is beautiful, yes, but also designed for function. It curves low for ease of use, has a slight tilt for pourability, and includes a subtle ridge at the base to prevent sloshing. He tells you these were used by ladies of the court, during the night placed discreetly beside warm sleeping mats, and emptied quietly before dawn. They were called yojibangi, or bangugi, depending on region and shape. And contrary to modern assumptions, they were not shameful, not hidden. Often they were displayed proudly as part of a dowry, because what better gift than a gorgeously efficient way to pee in comfort? Historians still argue whether all these vessels were truly intended for human waste. Some museum curators label them as flower pots, others as wine coolers. But if you ask anyone over 80 in a countryside village today, they'll tell you exactly what those were for and chuckle at your uncertainty. You're shown several other designs. One looks like a tiny amphora used by children. Another broader and lower favored by elderly men. All of them made from fine porcelain, many with gentle painted motifs, plum blossoms, turtles swirling clouds. It's not just utility, it's intimacy. These pots weren't mass-produced. They were family items, passed down sometimes, washed in spring water, tended with the same reverence as a teacup. And there were rules, unspoken mostly. You didn't clean your bangugi in the cooking stream. You didn't set it near the water basin for rinsing rice. You certainly didn't leave it outside unless you were inviting criticism from the neighborhood gossips. In wealthier households, these pots were fitted into built-in stone receptacles near the room's corner, lined with straw or ash to absorb liquid. In the morning, the contents were poured down a funnel, leading to a waste-only pipe, angled away from the house, sloped for gravity, and often shielded by a bamboo screen. It was a system, not just an object. You're taken next to a merchant's house where a display of ceramics includes what appears to be a large, squat, open-top vessel with tiny foot grips carved into the base. Now this, the host says with a sly smile, is the most misunderstood item in our museum. You lean in. Some call it a wine fermentation pot, others a baby bath. But oral tradition insists it's an all-in-one squat toilet used in households without channel plumbing. You look at the smooth curvature of the inner basin, the subtle ridges for grip, and the shallow groove that could guide liquids out via a spout. Suddenly, everything clicks. Sometimes plumbing didn't mean running water. It meant thoughtfully shaped stone and clay. It meant vessels that guided, contained, and collaborated with human need. In some village homes, you're told people built their yojibangi into the floor itself, squat-style porcelain bowls connected to buried pots or simple drains. A ladle of water followed the act, sluicing gently into the basin and washing waste down a clay tube into a compost heap behind the house. Not glamorous, but honest, quiet, and efficient. The idea of waste as something shaped by art is oddly comforting. You begin to see these vessels as more than tools. They're confessions, companions, artifacts that admit, yes, we all do this, and yes, we can do it gracefully. In one dusty corner of the ceramics hall, you find a forgotten pot. It's misshapen, cracked, and unglazed. Probably apprentice work, but the curve is still elegant, the lip still purposeful. You trace your finger around the rim and imagine how many lives it touched literally. Later, a museum guide shows you scroll paintings from late Joseon, featuring scenes of domestic life. In the corner of one bedroom there, it is a porcelain chamber pot half covered by a draped cloth, next to a bed where a mother reads to her child. No shame, no secrecy. You begin to notice this presence everywhere. In the stories, in the poems, in the quiet corners of daily life. These were not throwaway objects. They were extensions of people's comfort, shaped by the same artisans who crafted bowls for kings and cups for scholars. And yes, they helped make plumbing possible. Because a clay pot is the beginning of a system. It's where the water starts. What follows is slope, channel, garden, and renewal. You step outside into the breeze. Somewhere behind the house, a servant empties a pot into a side drain. The water catches sunlight as it disappears down the slope, heading off to nourish a persimmon tree or trickle into a compost trench. You smile. The cranes on the pot weren't optimistic. They were honest. They knew this was part of the flow. You leave behind the porcelain chambers and winding palace passages and walk downhill toward the outskirts of town, where rows of modest homes pressed together like old friends and neighbors call each other by the sound of their laundry buckets sloshing. Here, the quiet genius of Joseon plumbing doesn't live in heated floors or tiled eaves. It lives in wells, neighborhood wells. You find one just past a willow tree half covered with a weathered lid carved from wood. A woman stands beside it, rope in hand, lowering a pail with all the grace of a seasoned performer. Her motions are steady practiced. A thump, a gurgle, and up comes a splash of the morning's first water. The well is surrounded by raised stone blocks, arranged in a circle, creating a platform to prevent mud from slipping in. You'd expect some mud given last night's rain, but the platform is dry, clean even. Someone swept it. Someone always sweeps it. She pours a ladle into a ceramic bowl, sips and sets the rest aside. Another woman arrives, basket on hip, and the two begin chatting. Not about water, but about everything else. Husband's exams, how the neighbor's pickles were a little too sour. You realize the well isn't just a water source. It's a news outlet, a confession booth, a podcast in pre-modern form. These communal wells were usually dug shallow 10, maybe 15 feet deep, but they were smartly placed at slight elevations where groundwater wouldn't be easily contaminated by household waste. And remember those sloped drains from earlier? They were never allowed to run toward the well. That would be asking for trouble, or at least a visit from the local magistrate. Historians still debate whether these early zoning practices were enforced by government ordinance or simply passed down as common sense. Some towns' records show had rotating well keepers, individuals tasked with maintaining lids, replacing broken ropes, and sweeping debris. Others claim responsibility rotated by season or by who had the best gossip. You watch as a third woman arrives with a small child, lifts him up, and lets him lower the bucket for fun. When it splashes, everyone laughs. A boy runs past chasing a dog, and you see him instinctively avoid the gutter near the well. Even children knew you don't mess with the clean water source. Near the base of the platform is a small stone basin built into the side. This, you learn, is the bayat-mul discard water. It's where people pour the leftover dregs, too warm, too full of specks, not worth bringing home. From there, the water drains down a shallow channel away from the well, either into a garden or a dry ditch lined with charcoal and stone. You follow the channel with your eyes. It weaves gently through a patch of herbs, then disappears under a bamboo fence. Nothing aggressive, nothing forced, just slope and time. In some neighborhoods, these wells were shared by 10 or more families. Early in the morning, the women would gather not just to draw water, but to wash vegetables, rinse bowls, even clean babies. One bucket for the body, one for the soul, you hear someone say. You smile. A woman dips her sleeve and rubs a stain, then pours the water into the bayat-mul. She wipes her hands, looks up at you and says, "The water knows where to go." You believe her. At a nearby alley, you're shown another kind of well, this one sealed with a heavy wooden cover and locked with a simple iron latch. It's a baimulgol, a private well owned by a wealthy family usually located within the courtyard of a walled house. Unlike the communal wells, these were maintained by household staff and often decorated with miniature pavilions or protective charms. But even here, the rules were strict. No washing, no rinsing. Water was drawn into containers and carried inside before use. Wastewater, once gray, was never returned to the source. Always routed away, always downhill, always discreet. One attendant shows you how overflow from the private well is captured in a curved stone gutter and used to water a plum orchard just beyond the garden gate. In this way, the well served double-duty sustenance, first, then sustenance again. Elsewhere in a hillside village where homes cling to rocky ledges like birds on a cliff, you're led to a spring that bubbles from between two slabs of granite. Locals have channeled it into a hollow bamboo pipe that drips tick-tick-tick into a communal jar perched on a tripod of stones. There's no well, just the spring and the ritual, draw up or leave, enough for the next person. A boy arrives and fills a gourd. He drinks, wipes his mouth, and nods at the pipe as though it had done him a personal favor. Then he tips the excess into a side channel lined with moss and flint. The water keeps moving. All of this, the gossip, the care, the waste routing, is part of the plumbing story. Because plumbing isn't just about pipes. It's about people and flow and the space between the draw and the pour. You return to the original well and see someone adjusting the lid, tying it down against the coming wind. No one tells them to. It's just known. Water is life. Keep it clean. You sit for a while on the edge of the stone platform, watching the sun stretch over the rooftops and spill golden light into the shallow drain that leads away from the Bayet Moul. It glistens, it bends, it continues. And you realize the well didn't just hold water, it held community. And it had its own kind of genius, too quiet, shared, and built to last. Dawn breaks over the temple nestled high among the mist-wrapped peaks. You climb the stone steps slowly, your breath rising in soft clouds as bells chime in the distance, clear, measured, and oddly calming. They're not calling you to prayer. Not yet. They're calling the water. At the gate, a monk greets you with a bow, then silently beckons you inside. His robes whisper across the flagstones as he leads you past rows of pines, a trickling spring, and finally to a courtyard, where something fascinating awaits: a water clock. Yes, a water clock. Forget gears and cuckoos. In the Joseon temple, time flows, literally. You step closer to a low wooden stand holding a large bronze bowl filled with water. Suspended above it is a slow dripping ladle, its narrow spout releasing one perfect drop at a time. Beneath the bowl, a hollow gourd collects the overflow. As it fills, it tips. As it tips, it pulls a cord. As the cord moves, it rings a tiny bell. Tick, tock. No springs, no hands. Just patience, precision, and gravity again. This is the Rojong, an adaptation of even older Chinese clepsydras, designed to mark the passing of time not with tick-tocks, but with movement, sound, and balance. The monks used it to time meditation, cooking, and incense rotations. You watch as another monk resets the gourd, empties the overflow, and refills the ladle above. He does this without fanfare. It's not a performance. It's just time. Historians still argue whether water clocks were common in everyday Joseon life or reserved for temple and court use. But there's no debate about their elegance. This one's been working since before sunrise, and the only energy it needed was gravity and someone remembering to refill it. The monk gestures for you to sit beside him on the low platform. He places a small brass funnel on a square of silk and slowly pours a stream of water from a long spouted jug. It passes through the funnel into a ceramic dish below, swirling clockwise. This measures silence. He says, his voice barely louder than the stream. When the dish is full, it's time to stop talking. You look at the dish. You look at him. You both smile. Later, in the library annex of the temple, you're shown a tortoise-shaped vessel carved from jade green stone. The shell is flat, with a grid of tiny indentations. In each, a drop of water rests. The monk explains that the tortoise isn't just ornamental. It's a miniature timing tool. As water evaporates or trickles across its back, monks would track time by how many shells filled or emptied. It's adorable and genius. Also, there's something oddly reassuring about time being marked by the shape of a tortoise, slow, steady, unhurried, like the perfect bedtime story. You wander deeper into the temple grounds and find a stone basin tucked beside a bell tower. A stream flows into it via a bamboo pipe, then out again through a curved groove, chiseled into the basin's side. But here's the twist. The outgoing flow passes beneath a raised flagstone. Beneath that flagstone is a bell striker on a lever. Every quarter hour, as enough water passes the striker, dips ding, and then resets. A water-powered chime. You hear it now, a soft tone floating through the mists there. By mature air. No hand touched it, just flow and timing. This isn't plumbing in the traditional sense. It's metaphysical plumbing. Water as servant timekeeper and teacher. The monks bathe in stone basins warmed by sun and heated pebbles. Wastewater trickles into gardens planted with herbs, baekcho seshuk, and chamomile. The flow is gentle meditative. Nothing is forced. No pipe groans. No tap shouts. You're shown the temple's bathing chamber, modest, clean, perfumed. Faintly with pine resin. Water is stored in large jars filled from rooftop catchment. After use, the water flows through a stone-lined channel beneath a mossy bridge and into a meditation garden where it feeds a patch of mountain lilies. Everything we do begins and ends with water, says your monk guide. The body, the bell, the breath. You believe him. Near the monks' sleeping quarters, you see another water clock. This one is a flat tray with notches at the edge and a tiny spout in the center. As water drips outward, it fills each notch in turn. Each notch corresponds to a prayer. When the last is full, it's time to rest. He invites you to pour a new cycle. You do. The tray sighs. The water spreads, the first notch begins to fill. You feel calmer already. In a corner of the temple garden, a child monk, maybe 7, maybe 8, guides you to a simple experiment. He places a leaf in a groove carved into the stone path, then pours water behind it. The leaf drifts along the groove, turns a gentle corner, and lands in a pool beside a frog who seems deeply unimpressed. "This is my clock," the child says. You nod. It's perfect. You spend the afternoon following the temple's water system from rain-harvesting rooftop to jar to basin to channel to garden. At each stage, the water pauses. It reflects. It waits for you to notice it. And as night falls, the bells chime again. A water drop. A gourd tipping. A soft reminder that time is flowing but gently. Softly. Reassuringly. You close your eyes and wonder what if all timekeeping worked like this. What if your daily rhythm was set not by alarms or buzzing phones, but by the echo of a drop in a bowl? The answer drips slowly, steadily. Yes. Yes, it could. Evening settles across the capital. Lanterns flicker to life one by one, not with a shout, but a murmur. A glow passed, hand to hand, house to house. You trail your fingers along a painted wall inside an unfamiliar building, the guest house for foreign emissaries tucked discreetly within the royal precinct. It's quiet. Almost too quiet. But behind the tranquility is a curated stage 1, designed not for comfort alone, but for diplomacy. Because when foreign officials from Ming China, Ryukyu Kingdom, or Japan's embassies came calling, they weren't just shown the gold, the paintings, or the royal dance. They were shown the drains. Well, not directly, of course. That would have been rude. But everything around them, the wash basins, the private lavatories, the heated floors, the perfectly angled waterspouts was meant to speak. The palace staff knew impressing a diplomat didn't mean peacocks and poetry. It meant demonstrating control over nature, over flow, over filth. You pass through the tiled corridor and step into the foreign emissaries' bathing hall. It's exquisite. The tubs are made of lacquered pine warmed from beneath by gudul channels. One servant draws a bucket from a lidded clay cistern and tips it over the stones. The water runs in a graceful spiral toward a carved groove, then vanishes beneath a floor tile, silent, efficient. You're told that these baths were arranged to mimic those in the emissaries' home countries, except slightly more refined, just enough to make them raise an eyebrow. Oh, they'd murmur. So the Joseon know this too. Some records written in careful brushstrokes by nervous scribes suggest that Chinese envoys often commented privately on the cleanliness of Joseon latrines. One note reads, "Even the privy is perfumed by cedar and free of flies." Remarkable. You can almost hear the faint pride in the ink. Historians still argue whether this was intentional soft power or just good manners. But the layout speaks volumes. Emissaries' quarters had separate runoff systems from the rest of the palace, often routed through gently sloping hidden channels that passed under cherry orchards or along ornamental fish ponds. so water always appeared clean and tranquil even when it wasn't. You walk now through one such garden. A stream curves between stepping stones. Goldfish drift beneath its surface. A servant pours out tea dregs from a porcelain pot, and it merges seamlessly with the flow already filtered once by sand and bamboo partitions. Further along, a lavatory pavilion rare for any foreign guest to use directly sits behind a screen of painted folding doors. You peek inside. It's small, tiled in slate, with a low curved seat and a channel that drops discreetly into a ventilation shaft. The waste isn't exposed. It's carried away immediately by gray water redirected from the kitchen wash basins. Always sloped, always moving. In fact, the entire complex is designed so that no puddle sits, no smell lingers, and no guest sees a single drop out of place. The drainage tiles along the outer walls are spaced and angled. Precisely, yes, you measured with your toe. They slant just enough to allow flow, not enough to catch a robe. Hem. And there's a bell. No, not a prayer bell, a water bell. A small bronze bowl tucked beneath a bamboo fountain at the rear of the garden. As water from the rooftop spout fills the bowl, it tips every 10 minutes or so, ringing faintly. You learn that this tone signaled the rhythm of the guest house, a subtle clock, so the staff could coordinate without shouting or hurrying. Even time management here flowed. Inside the kitchen, a clay-lined gutter collects wash water and steams gently as it slips into a closed channel beneath the floor. A servant adjusts a small stone placed over the drain's mouth. You realize that stone isn't just lying there, it's regulating flow, slowing it down so it doesn't burble or splatter in front of guests. Another servant pours warm water into a narrow lip at the base of the hearth. It drains toward a vegetable garden, diplomatic vegetables, you're told. Ones chosen carefully to impress foreign palates. Even the runoff was curated. A scroll on a side wall displays a poem by a past envoy. Its verses seem to praise the moonlight, but a careful reader would notice something else, a line comparing the quiet ripple of the garden stream to the stillness of my thoughts when the lavatory is without shame. Yes, even the privy earned poetic praise, and there's more. One ambassadorial guest house had a small rain stage and a marble platform where rainfall was allowed to gather and flow visibly through a decorative channel shaped like a dragon. Not only was it beautiful, but it revealed the clarity of collected rainwater filtered 3 times before public display. The message was clear. Joseon does not fear inspection. Even our water speaks well of us. You return indoors, stepping across a heated floor so evenly warmed that it feels like a sleeping cat beneath your feet. You look down. No lines, no visible vents, and yet so much happening below. In one quiet alcove, you find a side door where waste jars were once removed, small lidded ceramic bins carried out each dawn by servants trained not just in discretion but in cadence. They moved silently, shoes wrapped in cloth so guests would never be disturbed. The waste followed a separate path entirely far from the kitchen or central channels and into composting trenches outside the walls. You watch as a servant now rinses a basin with water from a ladle, then wipes the stone dry. The runoff disappears into a floor channel so narrow you could miss it entirely. That's the magic, it's there, but it doesn't announce itself. As the lanterns are lit and the evening settles deep, a soft breeze stirs the paper doors. A diplomat from Ming China once wrote that staying in Joseon was like drinking tea poured by clouds, everything invisible yet present. You nod. And somewhere beneath your feet, the drains hum in agreement. You awaken in the early light of Seoul, but not the Seoul you know. This is Hanyang, the Joseon. Capital beneath the capital. The ancient city crisscrossed by alleys, marketplaces, and something far more forgotten streams that no longer exist. You're handed an old map, brushstrokes on yellowing paper. It looks like a child's drawing, at first all curling lines and tiny rooftops. But as your eyes adjust, you see the patterned creek's tributaries, tiny drainage veins all winding through the grid of the city like roots under a forest. This is a sewer map, or more gently, a water guide. It shows how Hanyang's planners envisioned not just movement of people, but of water clean and dirty alike. You begin walking. The first stream on the map is gone now, but in its place is a stone lane lined with houses whose back doors still slope slightly toward a gutter. That gutter curves underfoot, half buried beneath flagstones, and leads nowhere you can see. But it's there. In the early Joseon period, much of Hanyang's urban layout revolved around water management. Streams were respected, incorporated, never blocked without care. The city wasn't just built next to rivers, it was built with them. You trace the path of one such stream, the Cheongyecheon, once a lively brook that ran through the heart of the capital. Today, it's a restored river park. But for centuries, it was a lifeline for washing, for flushing, for gossip, for growing things in the cracks of its banks. Historians still argue whether Cheongyecheon was always respected or whether it fell into disrepair over time. What's clear is that every major neighborhood had access to it or to one of its tributaries. Some flowed naturally, others were gently invited to flow, guided by hand-carved stone bamboo aqueducts and simple slope. As you follow the stream's ghostly path, you're brought to a street where the drains underfoot are covered in wooden slats. Lift one gently, and you'll see a narrow channel still flowing. A whisper of the old system. Some of these were designed as Seongjeon underground channels that carried wastewater away from homes and into open trenches near the stream's edge. At first glance, they seem crude. But then, you look closer. Lined with layers of ash, gravel, and straw, they acted as rudimentary filters. Rain helped flush them clean. Charcoal kept odors at bay. You reach a courtyard where an elderly man sweeps leaves into a small side channel. The leaves ride the current round a corner and vanish beneath a gate. That one goes to the old stream, he says. You blink. But it's gone, isn't it? He shrugs. Maybe. Maybe not. It turns out many of these watercourses were only buried, not destroyed. Urban growth asphalt and the march of time have covered them. But the channels remain beneath parking lots, beneath sidewalks, beneath your very feet. You duck through a narrow alley where a barely visible groove in the stone still guides rainwater into a shadowy crack. It smells faintly of moss and iron. In the silence, you swear you hear it moving. One house has a basement window propped open. You peek inside and spot a clay pipe running across the dirt floor. It's capped now, sealed with wax and stone, but it once connected to the neighborhood's shared drainage trench. A silent artery from a time when plumbing wasn't purchased, it was participated in. You're told that children once floated boats made from gourd skins along the shallow edges of these creeks. That elders once placed jars of bean curd to ferment on shaded banks, the water keeping them cool through the summer. Not all was idyllic, of course. During monsoon season, many of these drainage paths flooded. Planners responded not with dams but with widening. They knew that water needs space, so instead of squeezing it into iron pipes, they gave it room to breathe. In one forgotten courtyard, half swallowed by ivy and time, you find a sealed well and a carved gutter stone engraved with something like a prayer. May this water never bring shame. You trace the lettering with your thumb. Beneath the city, a hidden plumbing system still hums a ghost network of forgotten rivulets, waste channels, bathwater runoffs, and garden drains. Some carry stormwater. Others just carry memory. And then a twist. At the city archives, a scholar shows you a scroll found beneath a demolished inn. It details the Hyeongsu or form water of the neighborhood, a mapping not only of visible streams, but of the imagined flow beneath. Where pipes were placed, where the soil drained best, where to dig if you needed water in a drought. It's a plumbing map, but drawn like a poem. You're told some neighborhoods still have elders who can walk these maps from memory. They point to a crack in a wall and say, "That used to be a fish stream." Or a dip in a road and say rain used to gather there and carry bathwater to the blacksmith. You look again at the map in your hands. It's not just plumbing. It's a diary. A circulatory system for a city that never forgot how to listen to water, even if we stopped hearing it. Even if the streams are paved. Even if the pipes are dry. They're still there. You find yourself walking beneath flowering branches, cherry blossoms delicate and ridiculous in their abundance. Petals tumble from the trees like spring snow clinging to your sleeves, catching in your hair, brushing against your cheeks with whisper-light insistence. But tonight you're not here for poetry. You're here for plumbing. And would you believe it, and even beneath this pastel dream-like cascade, water is at work. In the garden behind a mid-level official's house, you crouch beside a large clay jar half buried in the earth. It's catching runoff very intentionally from the curved eaves of the tiled roof above. The blossoms fall into it like confetti into a secret invitation. The water doesn't just stay here. Once the jar fills to a certain point, an overflow pipe made of smooth stone redirects it underground toward a garden basin just behind the main house. And from there, it moves again, gently trickling into the final stage of the system, a sloped channel that guides the flow beneath a bed of mossy stones. And out. Out where that's what you've come to see. You follow the path across the garden. It weaves beneath bamboo stalks and flowering shrubs beside a low wall etched with family seals and the occasional visiting cat. The water itself is mostly invisible now, hiding under footstones and disappearing into tiny drainage mouths, camouflaged among the garden's beauty. But the sound is unmistakable. Soft, polite, steady. Like someone whispering secrets into the earth. This is the outflow, and it's perfect. A shallow dip in the land lined with river stones and hedged by flowering quince marks the spot where all the house's gray water, bath dish rain, even foot washing quietly exits. It doesn't spill. It slips. Covered with reeds and ornamental grasses, the spot looks like a garden's sigh, a place where effort ends and renewal begins. It's not just function, it's performance. Because you're not meant to see this outflow. You're meant to feel it. To sense the rhythm of the house resolving in the hum of moving water beneath the roots of the cherry tree. A servant passes behind you with a basket of wilted greens. She tosses them into a compost bed just beyond the outflow, where filtered water will help the mulch decay evenly. Everything is connected. Here, use, reuse, return. She stops and nudges the stone over one of the concealed channels. It's a tiny maintenance ritual. Keeps the water honest. You ask clumsily how often she checks it. Once a week, she says. Or when the blossoms are thick. Makes sense. The petals could block the channel if left alone. Beauty has its consequences. Historians still argue whether garden outflows like this were engineered with formal plans or evolved through trial and repetition. Some say families treated it like art, balancing slope, scent, and silence. Others believe it came down to grandmother wisdom and a well-placed broom. Either way, it worked. And not just in noble homes. In middle-class residences, simpler versions flourished, a ceramic basin buried beneath the flower bed, a sloped trough hidden behind a storage shed, a runoff stream directed under the fence into a field of beans. But here among the blossoms, it's refined, controlled. You spot a narrow spout halfway down the slope, a little too decorative for what it is. It's shaped like a dragon's mouth, and out of it pours the last of a day's used water. Just a trickle, but steady. Always steady. At its base is a patch of Esasuk mugwort and Solseom Korean wild mint. The plants thrive on the runoff. They scent the air. They camouflage the fact that water is exiting here, because in Joseon gardening culture, outflow wasn't meant to announce itself. It was meant to disappear. In fact, some records refer to these spots not as drains, but as jumseo, soft vanishings. You think about that for a moment. Soft vanishings. Isn't that what good plumbing should be? You continue wandering the garden path. A narrow channel leads you toward a pond shaded by willows. A koi fish passes beneath a ripple. Somewhere behind the shrubbery, a boy splashes his hands in a basin laughing. The rinse water runs toward a hollow in the garden wall and vanishes. You place your hand over one of the stone channels, feeling the warmth from the day still lingering in its surface. You lean down. A few petals rest on the water. They float, spin gently, and drift into a hidden tunnel below. And again, it's quiet. No gurgle, no rush. Just glide. Even now, long after most of these systems have been forgotten or paved over, you find records of households where the garden drain was the pride of the family. Guests might be shown the tea room, the library, the garden, and, if you were lucky, the outflow. Discreetly, casually, but always with a little smile. Because making your wastewater graceful, that was genius. Quiet genius. Beneath the cherry blossoms, you sit a moment longer. You watch the petals fall. They land in the stone basin with tiny plinks, then follow the current into the slope. They float on unnoticed, unseen. But now, you see it. You see everything. The evening deepens into indigo. Lanterns flicker on inside nearby haystacks, casting soft gold onto clay walls and worn stone paths. The breeze shifts. It's cooler now. You pull your sleeves close as you pass through a quiet alley, your feet remembering the slopes, without thinking, your ears now trained to follow the sound of distant trickling. You've seen the rooftops, the baths, the underground channels. You've met the servants, the scholars, the monks, even the children playing with water, like it was a toy, a teacher, and a friend. And now you come to your final stop, Not a place, but a realization. There's something Joseon never told the world. Not with pride. Not with gloating. Not even in the footnotes. They solved your problems before you even knew they were problems. Quietly. Elegantly. With slope and smoke and stone. And somehow nobody talks about it. You cross a small footbridge where the sound of water disappears into a narrow crevice beneath your feet. There's no light, no pipe visible, but you know it's there. The drainage system is still working, probably centuries old, still guiding water out of the house under the road and into a trench that empties into a field of barley just beyond the wall. It's not called a sewer. There are no signs, but it is a sewer by the truest, oldest, kindest definition of the word. In the West, we often imagine progress as linear. Bigger pipes, louder machines, deeper holes. But Joseon didn't build up from ignorance. It built alongside nature, alongside people's habits, and let water do what it always wanted to do. You kneel beside a courtyard outflow, just a notch in the stone wall. You can smell nothing, hear only a soft hiss. A servant had poured out dishwater here an hour ago, and already it's vanished, absorbed into a gravel bed beneath the wall, funneled into the slope filtered by earth and welcomed by thirsty roots in the garden below. This isn't plumbing. It's trust. The people trusted gravity, trusted heat, trusted that clean water should be easy to access, and that dirty water should be easy to hide without shouting or pumps or white noise. And the system trusted people right back. There was no call the plumber. No industrial-scale sewage management with catastrophic failures. If the pipe clogged, you poked it with a stick. If the stone misaligned, you adjusted it with your foot. If the water wasn't flowing right, you adjusted the slope with a handful of dirt. It was all fixable, all visible, all local. Historians still argue whether we should use modern engineering terms when describing Joseon systems. Some say plumbing implies valves and pumps and pressure. Others argue that if a system manages water, removes waste, prevents disease, and warms your toes while doing it, then what more do you want? Because while London still struggled with the great stink of 1858, and Paris was just beginning to bury its fetid gutters, Joseon homes were sending rinse water through warmed stone under garden beds, and into bamboo-filtered drains that smelled of nothing but damp leaves. And yet here we are centuries later, still trying to get underfloor heating right. Still losing heat through forced air vents. Still managing wastewater with brute force instead of elegance. Why didn't we learn? Why didn't we listen? Maybe it's because the Joseon people didn't shout about it. Their solutions weren't cast in concrete or trumpeted in copper pipes. They were baked in clay, passed down through daily use, embedded in habits and broom strokes and the angle of your wash basin. And you know what? Maybe that's the genius, because the goal was never to build the most advanced system. The goal was to build something quiet, intuitive, repairable, kind. And in that, they succeeded. You pass one last house where a girl fills a teacup with warm water and rinses her hands over a small basin. The water runs down a curve in the floor under a cedar panel and is gone. The girl doesn't even look. She knows it's handled. And now, so do you. You stop at the top of the street, glance down the slope, and see it all at once. The rooftops, the garden basins, the bamboo grates, the flower beds watered by bathwater, the silent flow beneath stone paths, the elegance of slope, and the humility of good design. It never needed to be loud. It just needed to work. And it does. Even now. Even here. Even centuries later. And now you breathe. You let your body settle into the warmth beneath you, imagining the quiet stone of a Joseon floor warmed by yesterday's fire gently holding you like the curve of a palm. The air around you hums not with noise, but with memory. The whisper of water through bamboo. The hush of a clay pipe just doing its job. Let it all slow down now. You've wandered alleyways that curve with the land peaked beneath rooftops that think like rivers watch drops of water, travel farther and more thoughtfully than most people do in a week. You've seen how stillness holds power. How planning doesn't have to roar. How plumbing can be poetry. As you drift, imagine the weightless float of a cherry blossom. Petal, caught by a roof tile, guided down by slope and time. Finding its way to a shaded drain, then vanishing into earth. No splash. No hurry. No wrong turn. That's where you are now. You are the petal. You are the pipe. You are the pause between one drop and the next. Everything around you is working quietly, like the ancient hands that built it, meant for you to fall asleep exactly here, in this moment, on this whispering floor of memory. Let your thoughts flow like water, unforced, unbothered. They will find their slope, and you will sleep.